Great.
Hi, welcome to the September 3rd meeting of the Cyclical Research Science Society. And today we are very excited. We have Dr. Helané Wahbeh, who is not only the Director of Research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences and the President of the Parapsychological Association, but she's also a naturopathic doctor, healer, and obviously a medium channeler. So I'm so excited about all the phenomena that she has experienced in her own life and all of her research and clinical experiences. I am going to talk a little bit about her because I just really am so impressed with her. She not only has 25 years as a naturopathic physician and master clinical researcher, but she also is an adjunct instructor at the Oregon Health and Science University and at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Her work focuses on complementary and alternative medicine, mind body medicine, the focus of PTSD, and neurosciences and consciousness. She also has extensive training in meditation, has worked under John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher training. And of course, we're just so excited for her to come speak with us today. I would love to welcome her and get her to talk to us. So Dr. Wahbeh, thank you so much for coming to us. And let me definitely, there you go.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much, Angela, for that beautiful introduction. And it's wonderful to be here with you today talking about this topic that I personally love so much. So happy to share insight and what I'm up to.
Well, the first question I want to definitely ask you is tell us how you got on this journey. What led you to study phenomena, to study consciousness, to be the doctor you are and the director you're at? So could you tell us your journey?
It was a really wonderful journey full of synchronicities and opportunity. Growing up, I grew up in a very unique family in terms of spirituality. I was raised Orthodox Christian and would go to church every Sunday. My dad was a chanter in the church, very immersed in the Orthodox Christian tradition. Then my mother's side was a very spiritualist like tradition. I would go to my grandparents' house for meetings. Once a week, they would have these large meetings where my uncle, my grandmother would go into a trance channeling state and do trance channeling. So I was also part of those meetings. That much more esoteric tradition absolutely affected me and affected my worldview. And I also went to Catholic school. So I had these really three very strong spiritual traditions that kind of influenced my upbringing and my view on who I am, meaning of life, and kind of my purpose in this world. I really resonated with the spiritualist type beliefs. They connected as truth to me intuitively. So, all that being said, my spiritual life, I didn't really talk about it in my public world. And I ended up going to naturopathic medical school, very, very interested in health and healing and how our mind affects our health and healing, and going into clinical research and being able to evaluate that in a formal way, the mind body connection. And even though I had these personal sensitivities to channeling, I kind of kept it hidden. And all these things I experienced in my family, I didn't really talk about in my academic experience. So it was through a very wonderful synchronistic chain of events that brought me to the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And the acronym for that is IONS. IONS has been around for about 50 years. It was founded by Edgar Mitchell, and he had a profound transcendent experience when he was up on the moon. He was Apollo 14 astronaut, and he was up on the moon. He did his job. He was coming back, and he had this oneness experience that inspired him to study interconnectedness, including the things that you study here, mediumship, channeling, etc. So I learned about ions and I said, hey, I really want to come work with you. And the opportunities opened up for me to join the team and eventually become director of research at ions. So today, as director, it is the first time in my life where I can apply my clinical research training background to a topic that is of great personal interest to me. So I'm very, very grateful that I'm in this position today.
Oh, our group knows about ions. We post all of the research. Every time you're looking for participants, we let the world know as much as we can because our goal, of course, is the science aspect, and we really want to prove to the world that there's something else out there, that life exists after this physical form, that our consciousness is connected. Can you tell us a little bit about the actual science part of your directorship? Like, what kind of research are you specifically looking at ions?
We have a guiding hypothesis at IONS that really influences all the work that we do. And that is that we are all interconnected, and embodying that awareness allows us to access information and energy, not limited by our conventional notions of time and space. And that can in turn profoundly amplify our innovation and well-being and transformation. So if you think about that guiding hypothesis, it essentially has three pieces. We are interconnected. We can access beyond our traditional five senses, which is essentially psychic abilities, mediumship, channeling, etc., and then well-being. And so what I think your audience is most interested in is kind of that middle aspect. So we have a number of studies that we do around this. How do we access information and energy not limited by time and space? We propose, and there's growing evidence supporting this, that everybody, every human has the capacity to do this in some way, but that the way that they do it is unique to them. And so these experiences exist on a spectrum from intuition, gut hunches that anybody might, own up to, that they've had that experience of a gut hunch, to perhaps what your audience is more interested in, mediumship and trance channeling. So I've also written a book on this called The Science of Channeling, and I really have a very broad definition. When I say the word channeling, I really mean everything that's encompassed in that spectrum that I just described. And then I qualify trance channeling as a subtype of this broader channeling umbrella. And you might ask, well, what's the difference between mediumship and channeling? Some people use those terms interchangeably. The way I distinguish between them is mediumship is often a mental process where the practitioner may hear or see or receive symbols from a supposed deceased human. Sorry about that. But that they then translate that message in some way. Whereas trance channelers believe that their bodies are essentially used as a vehicle to for the supposed non-physical being to directly speak through them. So I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys get all those definitions, but I just wanted to clarify what I meant by those various terms.
So, based on that, the biggest problem anybody would have is proving that it's real. So, what degrees of authenticity, oh my gosh, I couldn't speak, sorry, do you use to prove that the channeling is real? Like, how do you prove it?
That is a great question. So, as a scientist, I try to stay away from the word prove, because you can look at any research question in an infinite number of ways to learn more about it. So I try to stay away from prove. We talk about growing evidence for something, right? So there are multiple ways that we answer the research question, can we verify these experiences? Someone says, oh, I had this intuitive hit. Well, how do you verify if that's a real thing, that it's objectively measured in some way? So there have been many ways that researchers have been evaluating this for over 150 years, really. And it kind of depends on the specific phenomenon, how we study it. If we look at, let's say, knowing the future or mental telepathy, there are rigorous laboratory experiments that have been set up in multiple labs around the world where people actually come into the lab and show, oh, I can actually know the future in a beyond chance statistical level. My body perceives the future in a non-chance statistical level. And there have been rigorous studies around remote viewing, telepathy, precognition, and also mental intention affecting the physical world, like psychokinesis. So those are kind of your general parapsychology phenomenon. So then we also have mediumship and trance channeling, and this whole idea of survival. Does our consciousness expand beyond our physical brain and persist once our physical bodies are not here anymore? We have personally, and also other researchers around the world, have been studying this for a very, very long time. The most traditional way to evaluate if the medium is getting accurate information is through doing case studies. So a researcher may study a specific medium over many, many years, collecting the information that they're receiving in their various sessions, seeing if they can verify it, whether it is a specific, supposed person related to the person in the session, or what might be called a drop-in communicator. And there have been rigorously documented case studies that are done kind of more in this social science anthropological way. So that's one way. Another fun way that our lab has been attempting to verify is through laboratory studies. So imagine a medium in the laboratory hooked up to electrodes that collect brain waves, heart waves, various aspects of physiology, and then they're asked to, tune in and get information about a deceased human. So our scientist Arnaud Delorme has done a number of studies like this and found that the brain waves were actually different when the medium was getting accurate information versus inaccurate information, which is quite fascinating. And first, I'll say that the mediums in these studies were able to perceive correct information at a statistically above chance level, which is quite fascinating. And more recently, what we've done, those previous studies were done kind of more in a traditional one-on-one session type atmosphere. More recently, we've designed laboratory experiments that pretty much anyone can do. So imagine sitting in front of a computer in a lab and seeing a picture of a person and then being asked, is this person alive or deceased? And so the participant is discerning in that moment, is this person dead or not, essentially. And that study was done with mediums, people who said they could do this quite well, and controls. And the trick about that study was that the database was always changing, because the pictures of the people, you never knew in that moment if they were actually deceased or not deceased. So we changed the protocol a little bit so that the pictures, everybody in the data set was actually deceased. And so what the medium was tuning into was how they had passed, whether it was a gunshot wound, a motor vehicle accident, cardiovascular incident, and something else that I'm not remembering in this moment. Now, when we were designing this study, you know, it was a little tricky because that's not normally how sessions are done. You know, you don't normally see so many pictures coming up and tuning into them so quickly. So that's kind of the trade-off that you get from doing a structured laboratory experiment versus observing and documenting in a natural setting. So I've talked quite a bit there, but that just kind of gives you a sense of the different studies that we're working on. I will say that the last study I just described did not find significant differences between the people who said they were mediums and the people who said that they didn't have any of that ability. So to me, this is not a negative finding. It actually, to me, supports this notion that I talked about earlier, that all humans have the capacity to tune in this way. And so I found that incredibly fascinating. And we're actually trying to get funding right now to do a much larger version of that study so we could have it available online to anyone who wanted to take it and have a much larger participant pool. So when we get that ready, we'll definitely let you know so
Oh, it's
your audience
fascinating.
can participate.
I'm so excited. Yeah, fascinating. Oh, well, let me talk about a little bit more personal. You yourself are a channel. So how did being a channel help you with your research, or at least pinpointing or focusing your research?
Thank you. Yes, as a child, I was very and am very sensitive to energies. I would get kind of intuitive hits about various things. And of course, I observed my mother, my grandmother, many of my family members do trance channeling. It wasn't until I came to ions and did a trance channeling study that I got very inspired to see if I could actually trance channel myself. And at the same time, I learned about a colleague, Patrizio Tresoldi in Italy, who created a hypnotherapy protocol to teach people how to trance channel. So I did that and then learned how to trance channel. And that experience was incredibly fascinating. And I think participant researchers is such an important aspect to parapsychology studies, at least acknowledging the researchers' beliefs, perspectives. There have been numerous studies already that show that something called the experimenter effect. So if I deeply believe in psi, I'm, like this works, this is real, this is going to be a positive study, the likelihood of it being a positive study is much higher than if I don't believe and I have the intention that the experiment is going to fail. So this is a pretty well-known, documented aspect to parapsychological studies. So that's one piece. The other piece is having experienced it yourself. I think it helps support study design and being able to set it up so that the participant is in a kind of successful atmosphere to show their best skill, if you will. And having had that firsthand experience, I think really supports that.
The other thing I noticed in researching your channeling, you talk about a collective consciousness in channeling. Can you explain what that means, and how does it relate to an actual idea of channeling, a collective consciousness?
Great question. I think people think of that term in different ways. Perhaps there's like the Global Consciousness Project that talks about, the collective consciousness of the earth and all the people on it. There's the Jungian concept of the collective consciousness and that all humans kind of can be tapped into this archetypical collective consciousness. When we did surveys of many different types of people who have channeling experiences, and we asked them, what do you think is the source of the information you receive? Many of them said it was this collective consciousness idea, that they're tapping into a greater wisdom that we are all connected to. And it was one of, I believe, the top 5 sources mentioned, along with higher self, was one of the very common ones. Deceased humans was one of the more common sources, and collective consciousness. Another related concept is this idea of group consciousness. So many trance channelers believe that, they're not just channeling one deceased person, say, or one ascended master or one being, that they are tapping into a group consciousness. For example, one channeler I know believes they're tapping into group beings that are related to the divine feminine, that hold the energy, frequency, etc. of the divine feminine, and speak to those topics when they're being channeled. So that's kind of a group consciousness, group being concept. I kind of went all over the place there. I hope that answered your
No, it
question.
answered it. It's beautiful. I love it. So based on the going another step further, your some of your research also studies energy, whether it's intuitive energy, healing energy, remote viewing energy, whatever the energy is. And I know you're some of it's showcasing the phenomena, but could you tell us what IONS believes energy is in the sense of dealing with phenomena or consciousness, and how does it work? How does it work in the research you've discovered on people using energy and how it's related to phenomena? I hope that makes sense.
It does. It is also a wonderful question. I think one of my biggest frustrations in working in this field is tripping over terms. It feels like what we are doing is indescribable and ineffable, and the experience of it is so hard to describe verbally, and we get into this big mess with vocabulary. So the word energy, from a physics perspective, has a very different definition than what a Reiki master might experience as energy. Now, the subjective felt sense for many people in this realm, it feels like energy. Either the energy is like chaotic or it's smooth. Another term that's often brought up is frequency. It's either high frequency or it's a low frequency. So our bodies, our systems, etc., are relating it with these physics terms that may not necessarily line up with what a physicist says they are. Okay. So that being said, we've done a number of studies with energy medicine practitioners. So they call themselves energy medicine practitioners. They believe they use some form of universal or other type energy to support people to come back into a state of optimal health. And we did one large pilot study with people who had hand and wrist pain with 17 different energy medicine practitioners, saw improvements in pain. We also saw that there were water vials that they were wearing and that the participants were wearing. We saw changes in the bond between the oxygen and the hydrogen in the water, which was quite a fascinating finding. We saw changes in something called a random number generator device during the sessions versus control times, reflecting increased coherence in the environment during the sessions. We also had a unique aspect to that study where a clairvoyant seer was sitting in the corner of the room and was observing all of the almost 200 sessions. And there were interesting findings that she observed when healing occurred. One of the themes that is probably relevant to this talk and that we're really interested in is the number of non-physical beings that she observed in the space, observing, supporting the participants, supporting the healer in this energetic healing session. So that was quite fascinating. We did a follow-up study to that with Reiki masters, where we had Reiki masters giving 30-minute sessions to 40 participants. And there were 6 clairvoyant seers observing the sessions. And we had them record their observations in multiple different ways to see if there was a corroboration across those 6 seers. So are the seers seeing the same thing? Is there, a red color that's arising from the liver when the Reiki master is processing old anger or something like that, just as a random example. And what we found is that when seers tune in to what's going on, if we don't give them specific instructions, it's kind of like standing in front of a fire hydrant, and that there are layers of information that they have access to that they can pull out. And so I said the word information. What is rising from multiple different fields now is this concept of energy as information, and that perhaps consciousness at a base level is just information. And I certainly resonate that from my own channeling experience. And I'm really curious to see how that unfolds from the other scientific disciplines as a theory for kind of the nature of reality.
Well, I could listen to you all day. It's fascinating. I love it. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about your gene network therapy, where you are studying psychic abilities in participants with ancestral connections. So the first thing, obviously, we know you have it in your family, grandmother, mother, you've mentioned that. But do you believe as a scientist that psychic abilities can run in families? Or do you believe, like you mentioned earlier, that maybe this ability runs in everyone?
That's an excellent question. So my short, quick answer is I don't know. We've done very small pilot studies, and there have been very, very few studies on this, formal studies on this. The one study we did looked at highly vetted psychics. There were 13 of them, and compared to controls who had no psychic ability, no family members with psychic ability. And we found a really unique difference in the non-coding part of the DNA. So this is the part of the DNA that doesn't code directly for proteins, but perhaps has some role in protein expression. And so that was a very preliminary finding. And what was unique about it is that this original form of that DNA is what's called the wild type. It's the original form. And then the controls, the people without psychic abilities, had a mutated form of that part of the DNA. We further did an analysis when we looked at a large database that had thousands of genomes and looked at that in relationship to the spread of Christianity and also to the increased technological advancements. And so the rationale for this was, as Christianity spread, there was more persecution and killing of people who had these abilities strongly. And so perhaps there was some pressure to mutate that gene so that they would survive. And then in terms of technology, If you have GPS, you don't need to tune in to where the buffalo are because you can just find it on your map. That there was some kind of practical evolutionary pressure to not be so intuitive anymore as the Industrial Revolution, et cetera, increased. So what we found was that there was a strong correlation between an increase in mutations and technology, and a significant but not as strong association with increased mutation and the spread of Christianity. So this small pilot's results are need to be confirmed, but the fact that this kind of extra analysis looking at these social factors align with it is really quite intriguing. So we're hopefully going to raise some more funds. Genomic analysis are quite spendy, so we have to raise quite a bit of funds to be able to continue this research. Now back to your original question. My hypothesis right now is that all humans have the capacity to channel in some way. But my sense is that genetics may influence the type of channeling that we could potentially be good at. So as an example, you know, I'm 5'2", I'm a short human. I can take a basketball and I can dribble it and I can go shoot it into the basket. I have the capacity to do that. Am I ever going to be an NBA player? No, I like totally am not great at basketball, right? So someone else who, you know, is really tall or, you know, has the genetics to be incredibly athletic, can also has the capacity to play basketball, but they're going to have a much better chance of being in the NBA than I am because of my genetics. We both can play basketball, but one may be much better than the other person at specific skills. So my main message in all this is so important in that there's not one that's better than the other, that we all have the capacity to tap into our intuition and whatever that looks like, and that it just can show up in unique ways for people and to really honor the beautiful diversity of that. So that's a really important message that I try to impart to people. The other thing I know is that regardless of your genetics or your capacity, that it can also be trained. There's many people who teach these various skills and see if someone has the desire and the belief that they can do it, that they can actually learn how to do it. So these are really important pieces, I think, for this work.
As we become more and more global and we start learning about different cultures and different ways of accessing their consciousness and their ability to communicate in as a medium or a channel to the spirits or whatever you want to call it, terminology again, right? Do you think that there is a difference between cultures in the sense of how to channel, maybe even between genders, maybe even between views? But what I'm asking mainly is there a set criteria of how to channel that gets success, or is everybody unique in the way they do it?
That's also a wonderful question. You know, in my book, I talk about this a lot, and I'm a proponent of individual choice and finding your own path. Empowering people to use their intuition, to develop their intuition in the way that works best for them. Now, that being said, there are, you know, people have been doing this, you know, throughout human history, right? So there are learnings that we have gained through our ancestors. And so you'll notice in my book, and you'll notice, you know, spiritualist center. There's various guidelines, if you will, for how to go about channeling and for specific types of channeling. So the way that I hold those guidelines is as a structured container, not as a rigid dogma. And so how do we allow for some variability in individual paths and yet learn and take advantage of the incredible wisdom of people that have come before us about how to do this? You know, just as a simple example, like the Ouija board, you know, I was always trained growing up that you don't just willy-nilly walk up to a Ouija board and start trying to do that, that there's a specific, you know, guidance around protocol, intention, setting the space, setting protection to do that. And it's not that the supposed spirit world is out to get us per se, but that there is a intentful way to begin your path. And that while there can be variability about how individuals do it, there is wisdom that has come through many, many people with some structured guidance around how to do that. I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. Um, I know we only have a little bit longer, so I want to get to the part where we try to help too, especially with your research. We at we call ourselves PRSSR, PRSS, but it's the acronym. We really want to support researchers like yourself and all of the other ones at your institute. So could you tell us about any of your current research or direct us to where we need to go in order to help our members and any of our people that like to support our group learn about how to become participants or even just donate? And do you have any advice, especially for budding researchers, especially in phenomena and channeling and psychic and all that? So that's one of my last questions for you, because I know we're running out of time, but if you could answer that.
Thank you. Yes, the Institute of Noetic Sciences website is noetic, noetic.org. On there, you can find our peer-reviewed publications. You can find our participate in research page where we have a number of different studies. If you get on our email list, then you'll be alerted to our various study opportunities. We have some really fascinating ones that I saw on your website, actually. So thank you so much for supporting those. We have a collaboration with Columbia University and Harvard looking at structural neuroimaging, or the structure of the brain, and how that relates to psychic abilities. So that's one wonderful way to stay connected. We also have IONS, Connect IONS Live, which is our no-cost webinars on Fridays where we gather as a community and learn about different topics. I'm also the president of the Parapsychological Association, and many people think, oh, I can't be a member because I'm not a researcher. We actually have many different membership levels to join the Parapsychological Association, and that allows you to come to our member-only Sayagora, which are conversations about parapsychology topics. We also have symposia that are open to the public. Again, on various topics. We have a wonderful magazine called Minefield. So those are really wonderful ways to plug into this incredible work around these topics and to support that research.
I am just so grateful that your organization and that you have just done such amazing research with phenomena. The biggest part, I think, is getting it out there to the public that not only is it a spiritual, because a lot of people view it as spiritual, it is scientifically, part of our life. And the more research and the more evidence we prove about the connections that we all have, I think it just would help our whole world and our whole beings, you know. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. I hope you come back and talk to us maybe next year when your schedule clears up, because I know you're so busy. But I just am so honored to have you. Thank you, Dr. Wahbeh. Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank you so much, Angela. I really am so grateful for this excitement for each individual to tap into their intuitive wisdom in whatever way that looks for them to support themselves, their families, their communities, and ultimately our world. Thank you.
we're going to share our finding again, and to remind people that our next meeting will be October 6th. And again, Dr. Helané Wahbeh was here speaking with us today on our September 3rd meeting. Thank you so much, very much. Thank